Hello everybody, I'm Dan Raggett and I'm the resident director on the Nether, the show you've just seen. And with me I have Luke Halls, a video designer, and Devlin, the designer. I hate being on stage, which is why I choose to sit down there. So I'm not going to talk very much. I'm going to ask them a few questions and then we'll open it up to you guys. So this Q&A is called The Future of Theatre Design, I remember. And so I thought I'd jump in there and ask how technology is affecting the way you design. I'll hand that to the set designer then.
Sorry, what was the question? How is technology changing how we design for the stage?
That is the question, yeah.
Well, as I mentioned just a minute ago to my friends, Luke and everyone else in the room we were just in back there, I looked up the word technology just a minute ago because I thought that would be a good start to talking about technology in the theatre. It would just good to know what the word means, do you know? Does anyone know what it means? Etymologically speaking, just the actual origins of the word technology. Just interested to know who knows what it means. Hands up, who knows what technology means? That's really good, isn't it? This is good. So actually, what I looked up was probably useful. So from the Greek, techne, meaning art, craft or skill, any means of doing anything, and logos, meaning words or talking about or expressing an inward feeling of anything. So basically technology originally meant talking about art or finding words to talk about ways of doing things. And obviously it would be really interesting if I'd had longer in the car journey and hadn't just looked up the word. I would have tried to find out how the word got from meaning that to meaning what we take it to mean now, which, I mean, when you ask us that and you say, how has technology, you mean new technology, you mean new ways to do things, do you mean newness?
Yes, I imagine that, very close. I think I'm referring to specifically because I'd say this isn't your traditional box set by any means, in the sense that it does a lot of different things, and it's just about how opening up the realm of possibilities that new technology offers changes the way you approach a play from the first time you read it. I mean, specifically with the Nether.
Because you see, newness is another thing. Did you hear that thing? It was on Radio 4 the other day about newness, about how. Did anyone else hear that? About just anything new, because we're sort of evolved as a species to get a little kick of dopamine. Did anyone hear that? It was all over. It was all over in the morning. It was one morning, start of the week or something. That any time we experience anything new, we get a little shot of dopamine, and we love it, and we feel happy because it's new. So I think this is a long-winded way to answer your question, actually. There's another thing which it always comes to me, and we've talked about this before, which is that T.S. Eliot thing, and I think it's from, someone's going to correct me, but I think it's from The Wasteland. And he says, always finding words for things we no longer need to say. And I think that's what the act of working on any piece of design is. Because, for example, you read a piece like The Nether, like the piece many of you have just seen, and the things that are required to stage this play, the language that we needed to develop, that Luke and I and Jeremy Herron and the lighting designer and costume designer needed to develop, is so specific to this piece. And it's finding the words for this specific thing, and we'll never need those exact words again. So I guess, when you ask me about technology, and we find that technology doesn't really mean what we think it means, but new technologies, what you're really asking about, then I think for each piece we approach, we find these combinations that are so specific to it. So one of the things I've talked about before is, an act of design isn't really this thing. It's the exact moment of when Luke times the exact turning of red of this area of the screen, and the actress puts her hand on there, and then this thing moves. And the technology involved in that is basically a whole load of people speaking to each other on headphones, saying do this, do that. So it's nothing, I guess when we spoke about this talk, what we kind of admitted to each other is, in terms of what you've just seen on this stage, there's nothing very newly technological. It's basically bits of sellotape and string and some bits of branch that we stuck some fake leaves on and some really cheap mirrors and some bits of string that lift this thing up and down and a light over there that, you know, and then the bit in front of the light that makes the light change shape to be the projecting things, that is a bit more advanced, we'd say, wouldn't we? So shall we hand to you for that?
Yeah, so obviously it's very difficult, I think, to be a video designer without having technology in the frame at some point. But as says, the technology that we use for a show like this is actually not that new. I think developments in sort of projection technology and, you know, the screens that we use here for theatre are more about when they become small enough to be usable, quiet enough to be usable, so you as an audience member don't notice that we've got two projectors hung up there. Actually, these are very old bits of technology in that way. And so I think new technology does change the way that you approach design as a video designer, because it allows you to do new things, but always in the same way, I think. So, you know, light emits from a source in the same way, you know, that's not going to change. But I may be able to get a slightly brighter projector, which will create a slightly different effect for a particular show. And as far as something like the technology here, that's just that's a telly in a box. You know, it's not. It's a very cheap telly. That was a practical solution to a problem that we had that was defined by the text. So when reading through the text, you know, when we sat down with Jeremy, there was a whole discussion going on about how you could possibly interact with the Nether. And this was a way of not being too specific about it, because I think as soon as you get into specifics of this is how you would log into this particular space, then I think that takes you out of the story. But it was just a way of showing how someone might develop technology in the future and interact with a virtual environment.
Do you know, I read a review of this play, actually, by someone who hadn't seen it. I don't know if anyone else read that review. Did anyone else read that? There was this review by a guy who hadn't seen the play because he was in Edinburgh. And he wrote a review based on having seen a photograph. And he said, the trouble with this is I can tell from the photograph it was a terrible design. Because I've read the play, and really what they should have done with it is they should have made all the people virtual. And he'd seen the photograph, because you know some of the photos are just of actors. And he just thought there was actors in it, you know, and it was all too solid. And so he absolutely panned the thing, having seen a photo and read the play. But I think there's something quite interesting in that, is that, as you're talking about, that moment that you've all just seen when they're sitting, go on, do it. They're sitting like that, and they're doing that. And, you know, you kind of do, I mean, you'll correct us if I'm wrong, but I think you do sort of buy into the fact that these people are somehow turning into those people. When they're clearly just, you know, it's the very simple thing, it's just two different actors up there. But, you know, I think also the way that Luke has mapped, and you should talk a little bit about your scanning, because there is a little, we're playing down the newness of any technology here, but Luke has got a 3D scanner, quite a cheap Maplin one, isn't it? Isn't it not Maplin? I mean, it's an expensive one. Anyway, he's got a 3D scanner, and he did scan the actors. Go on, talk about your scanner.
Yeah, there's a few different things I was really playing with when we started to develop the Nether last year. Actually, the original scans were actually done with an Xbox Connect. Yeah. So it's the little device that allows you to interact with your computer games. That there has been some software developed for it that would enable you to recreate 3D objects. Now there was another scanner that I used, which was a Kickstarter project that I've been involved with for a while, which means you can actually attach it to the back of your iPad, and then I can point it at an object, walk around the object, and it turns it into a 3D model. Now that kind of stuff is exciting, but that's on the image-making side of technology, which there's a lot of development going into at the moment with the likes of Oculus Rift and things like that. People are really wanting to find So Oculus, yeah, sorry, people might not know what that is. Okay, so it's a virtual reality headset that you can put on, which has been developed to enable you to walk around rooms. So a sort of modern version of Lawnmower Man, the kind of 80s virtual reality. So people are sort of starting to get quite interested in how you capture environments and put them into a virtual world to enable you to walk through. And so there's been a lot of development into those things by Google and other people. So now there's a whole world of scanners out there that enable you to capture objects in your home and turn them into 3D models with textures.
So if you talk about the moment where we go from the wireframe image of the man swinging the girl around, and that translates exactly on.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, that's slightly different because I've cheated that, to be honest. Okay, so
mirrors.
Yeah, that is not a scan. That's actually just a piece of green screen footage that I've treated and taken through a certain process that enables it to have the same aesthetics as the scan. But it's later on where we move into the Nether and you see all of the furniture. We actually laid the furniture out and we scanned that in tech. So there was a whole load of different processes and different techniques that we used throughout the piece to create that aesthetic. But I was very keen to go for the scanned aesthetic, the sort of triangulated grids, because that feels more modern than wireframes. So if it was a more traditional wireframe, it would feel a bit more Tron and a bit more retro, which was something that we were really keen to avoid. That this was a technology that was from the future, and so that kind of choice of scanners and which one to use was an aesthetically driven choice.
Do you want to ask us another question?
I might ask you another question, although I had a sidebar question from that, which I think I might save, but I'm sure it'll come from our head. My next question was, it's highlighted in how shared that answer was, which is about the prevalence of video design as something which is used in theatre, and whether you think that's on the rise. And equally, as whether you feel threatened by that. Is there a version of the Nether which could be entirely video designed?
Actually, this is good because I had a little story I wanted to tell. But when I first started going to the theatre in the mid-90s, the stuff that really excited me was, the Robert Lepage, the Robert Wilson, Pina Bausch, a lot of what I saw was using some kind of projection. But back then it would have been, 35mm film projection probably in stills. And I had an ambition when I did one of my first projects that I wanted to project, and it was a very low budget thing. I think it was literally, there was nothing, there was no money. And I managed to persuade the English National Opera to lend me their big Pani stills projectors, which basically took 8-inch glass slides. And so I went to the glass cutter and I got 8-inch bits of glass. And then I taught myself Photoshop, because I didn't know how to do Photoshop at all. But I sort of made myself learn it and printed out onto acetate pictures and layered them up because the print wasn't thick enough. So I had about 3 layers of acetate sandwiched between 2 bits of glass, and I put sellotape around the edge, and I just slotted them into these big old projectors at the back of the Queen Elizabeth Hall or something, where I was doing some student show. And it was actually the night that Princess Diana died. And I was up all night watching TV, and I'd rung my brother because it was taking ages to print these things out. And we had the most surreal night, cutting out bits of, printing bits of acetate, putting them between bits of glass, and watching this news. And it sounds like a sort of irrelevant detail, but it was kind of my engaging with how to project onto bits of scenery. And I think what fascinates me and you about it is that what happens to your eyes. Ben Ormerod, who's a lighting designer who taught me a lot, he explained how the eye works with the rods and the cones, and I forget which way around it is, but one of them perceives form and the other one perceives colour, and there'll be people in the audience who tell me which way around it is. But when you're watching projection onto a sculpture, when you're watching something that's graphic and two-dimensional and made of light interact with something that's three-dimensional, then those rods and cones are basically having a field day, which is why a number of years ago, whenever it was in 2000 and whenever it was that we all first saw projection mapping, I mean, we were all excited. You know, when Muse first said to us, Muse's manager said to me, "I'll sue you if you do projection mapping with anyone else." Anyway, it was funny at the time. But now, of course, you know, every castle's been projection mapped to fall down. We've done a big old thing at Avignon with Master and Margarita where we made the walls fall down, and even then it felt like it was getting a bit unfresh, didn't it? Even back then, but still.
It's projecting on stuff.
Yeah, but we like, so what fascinates us is, you know, the interaction between an object, preferably a moving object, and moving images on it, because it just feels like, emotionally, the permutation and combination of what you can achieve.
Yeah.
So it's been a sort of journey from that night, whenever it was it 1997? When did Princess Diana die? But it was that night of sitting there, cutting out these bits of glass.
1997.
Thank you. From then till, that was nearly 20 years later, isn't it? 18 years later of just evolving and evolving. And then, again, back to that T.S. Eliot thing, how you use it is just in terms of the story you want to tell. And I think with this story, that the key thing was that the people are flesh and blood. You know, the people are the actors, and we didn't want to do what that reviewer who didn't like the play and he hadn't seen wanted us to do, which is we didn't want to get into a thing of looking at screen people and look, you know, we had to somehow, because the whole point about the Nether is that you believe the blood and the flesh and the viscera. I mean, I think this piece, is ultimately about love, actually, and I think it's about, you know, when she sits here in the seat and she just talks about how much she felt. She just said, I'd never felt so much. That, I think, isn't it, the core of this piece is the viscerality of feeling. And really that's, you know, you had to have actors to do that. You couldn't have just...
Yeah, I think it would be difficult to connect with, you know, projected people. That is what theatre is about. It's about connecting with...
I'll read this review.
Someone did suggest it in one of these Q&As a couple of weeks ago. She objected to the presence of a real child in the play and suggested that Luke should have designed an avatar which could have played that role, and that would be a safer way to...
But you should actually explain about the girl, because she doesn't hear the other scenes.
Yeah, that is part of... I'm not quite sure how it works, but they are taken out and they don't hear scenes that they're not part of. So there was a huge sort of protection layered into that, so that it is kind of covered.
It's quite comprehensive, so it'll take a while to explain, and it's off topic, but I will happily explain it to anybody who wants to ask me afterwards. But moving back to
well, your original question was about video designers and...
why not watch a film, I guess is the...
Sorry?
Why not watch a film, I guess, is the lowest common
Why not
denominator
watch a
version of that
film?
question.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if we could just bring in a big screen and just watch my work, that would be the absolute ideal. But no, I don't at all. I think watching things acted out in front of you, obviously, is a much more engaging process. I think when you watch projection on its own, I'll tell you what, one of the things as a projection designer that I find it is important to do is what I call break the rectangle. So people have a way of judging your work if they see it in a 16:9 frame. Everyone knows how to criticise TV, film, they know how to critique these things. And so part of the job as working with similar mediums as film and TV is to actually work with a set designer to break that rectangle, to do something different, which means that people approach your work in a completely different way, with a completely different critical eye. And that's partly what's so exciting about projecting onto different objects that aren't flat, that aren't obviously a sort of medium of communication like a TV or a feature film. And so when we sort of sit down and start talking about sets, I mean, some of the things that go into a studio and she shows me are just absolutely terrifying for a video designer. Like, you know, when I sort of take a step back when I see something and so I'm going to have to think about that one. But they are, they're well, all of them. I mean, even something like Don Giovanni.
Some of them, now it's all of them.
Well, yes. Okay. So they're quite difficult shapes to work with, and actually how do you communicate through image, because they're not just big flat surfaces. But that's really exciting, and I think that's what's really exciting about theatre and using projection in theatre, is there's just a whole new way of communicating with people, and I think it's a great layer to add over the right place. And so the trick is finding the right place where projection performs a real role and adds a real voice to that story.
Which sort of leads me into my final question before I open it out, which is about whether you think the work you're doing, not to make it sound grandiose in any way, is affecting the plays that are being written and the kind of work that's being made. And alongside that, every time that something like this, because this design has been quite rightly nominated for numerous awards, that every time that there's a success like that, you feel the pressure of the need to continue innovating, and whether that's a helpful or unhelpful thing.
The continue innovating thing comes from that little dopamine rush that you get when you do something new or you hear something new, I think. But also, I think it's an interesting question that, did Jen, because Jen Healy, who wrote this piece, she's got another production of this on right now, hasn't she, in New York, yeah. Which is, I don't think involves any projected imagery.
No, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't. No.
I think the photos I've seen of it are, it's a revolving stage, and it has a house on one side.
But that was the LA production.
Oh, that was the LA one.
It has a large iron door which opens and closes.
Right.
So it's no video, no projection.
So there's been two other productions of this piece, one of which I've seen photos of, which was basically a bit like our little. In fact, I think I subliminally made that production in our doll's house, because that other set design is exactly that doll's house, isn't it? So the little doll's house that you see here, imagine that being the whole thing. That was the Nether, and the room, the interrogation room, was where? It was on the other side. It span, yeah. So that's how they did it in LA. And in New York, they've got a big door.
It's a big door, and you don't ever quite see into the hideaway. It sort of opens part way, and the world melts out into this room we sit in now, as far as I'm aware from what I can see on videos and production photos.
So I think Jen, although she is a game designer, her background is in, the woman who wrote this play, her background is in writing code, and she understands code and gaming from the inside, because that's what she did. So I think even she didn't probably have in her mind the idea of technology as, if by that we mean projecting on things. I don't think she had that in her mind when she wrote this piece, but I guess, certainly working with Simon McBurney, when he's devising, so on Master and Margarita, for example, I think that would be a really good example of someone who takes the tool of projection and sound design and lighting design into the rehearsal room and treats it as one of the members of the cast in the way that his actors are. So he'll be in the room with all his people, he'll have all the projections set up from day one of the rehearsal process and all the sound design. So those things are really intrinsically part of making the work and of devising the work. So Master and Margarita, there wasn't anything before rehearsal started. And that work couldn't have been made without those pieces of kit. And there's other things I think that he's working on which are entirely based on the quality that the headphones are going to achieve. And if you look at, I don't know if anyone's seen Game that's on at the Almeida, which is very much dependent upon the whole divide. The way that Mike wrote that play, I think, is very dependent upon knowing that the audience would have their headphones, they would be looking at the screen. So I do think work is being written specifically for certain forms of use of sound and light and projection, but I don't think this piece was, and I think quite a lot of I don't think Chimerica was, which is another piece that I worked on that had a lot of layered projection in it, and Don Giovanni certainly wasn't. So I don't know. I guess there are examples of pieces that have been written specifically with this in mind, but I can't immediately think of any apart from Game.
Good. Anything to add, Luke, or you?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is I think one of the interesting things about Simon Burney and people who are working with technology and the way that pieces develop is I think that's really exciting, and much more exciting than trying to layer something over the top of something that you're almost shoehorning the technology in. So to take, whenever I talk to people about sort of technology in theatre, the question of interactivity usually comes up, of actually how can you make a piece that performers can interact with. And there's a lot of people out there that are developing technologies, so using, for example, infrared, where if I moved on a stage, the projection would react behind me. And I think that's kind of interesting if you can embed that in the way the piece is developed. So if a piece is workshopped like Simon Burney does, and they create a piece of software that they can then interact with. So a good example of that would be in the McBurney piece that we worked on together with Finn Ross, another video designer, where I was talking to everyone about how Simon likes to use chairs in a performance. So a chair represents an individual, and that's why in a lot of complicité performances there are a lot of chairs. And then we were, in the piece itself, there is a ride through hell on the back of a horse, which everyone was wondering how they were going to stage. And so I went away and I built an animation of a horse made out of chairs, which sounds slightly ridiculous, but it was kind of interesting. And I sent it to the rehearsal room. Immediately, they projected it onto the floor, and the actors all sort of stood around looking at each other and then started to play with that piece of animation. And so 5 minutes later, after sending this file over, I got this film back of these actors all sort of climbing over this piece of animation and interacting with it. And that led all the way into the final piece. And it meant that the actors could actually go, oh, it'd be great if we could do this, or it'd be great if we could do that. And I think that's quite interesting. That sort of way of developing a piece of theatre.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions from out here? I'm sure there are. Yes?
I have one which is for Luke and yourself, Dan. I don't know if it was the case, but those pieces where you have a character being interviewed, and then up on the video projection, we can see another perspective on them. I don't know if they were live, but I wonder if you could shed light on why it is that we want them to be live.
So just to repeat the question, this is about the video which is projected up in what we call the interrogation scenes, and whether it's live, and if so, why we want it to be live.
Well, I think there are, just to explain what we did, some of it is live. So some of it is pre-recorded. There are two little cameras just sat there that are, again, just cheap little CCTV cameras. Yeah, they're from cctvfirst.co.uk, I think. So they're very cheap, but that would be the only way that we could implement that kind of technology on a show of this scale. And that's part of our job, is actually saying, oh, here's an idea, how can we do it with this quite meagre budget sometimes? And we have to find different ways of doing it. There'd be better cameras that I could find that would shoot them in a more interesting way, or remote control heading cameras that I could then zoom in on them. But that wasn't necessary to communicate what we needed to communicate, I think. Your second part to your question, why do we want them to be live? I think we do want to see a different angle on what's happening on stage. And it does give the actors another way of communicating with an audience. If there was a whole sort of period we went through during rehearsals, where we got getting the actors used to those cameras and actually how they could use those to communicate to the audience. So whether it's just a little glance here or just a little move here, they, instead of acting that out to you in a big way, they could be much smaller, more detailed and sort of more finite moves.
And doesn't it also raise the stakes for her character? That we don't know what setup she's got. We don't know what the powers are around this interrogation. We don't know whether there's notionally, you know, a huge room of 50 people behind this screen who are all observing every little tick and move and, you know, biometrically measuring every move of the iris. I think that's kind of the questions it's meant to start asking you as an audience to think about. Is how many people has she got behind her? How many people are supporting her? Is she doing this on her own? Is it all of a sudden, or has she got really a whole phalanx of people who can analyse every moment of it and support her? Is there a whole system behind this interrogation room? You know, when that moment when she finds out the exact coordinates of the location of the server, you know, this thing sort of starts going into action with the sense that people are now immediately acting on that information. There are others, and I think that's really the answer to your question. She's not alone. There is more to it than just her on a chair in a room, I think.
I think there's also, I know I'm supposed to be chairing, but I think there's also one of the questions I had written down, which I won't ask, is do things like video design threaten the liveness of theatre? And I think, I mean, I was going to ask it, but thinking about it, I thought, in a way, the reason we want them to be live is because it enhances it. It reminds you that what is happening on stage, something to do with our language that we have with cameras and recording, it reminds you that what is happening with these people here is happening right now and will only happen this way once, ever. So I think in a way, I don't know if you agree or disagree, it somehow enhances that. Yes?
I mean, supposing in 20 years' time or even less, virtual reality is a real thing, we can all do. Is there a danger of plays like this which are so present, current, is there a danger of them becoming dated then? I mean, how could you stage the play in 50 years' time when we can actually do everything inside of this, or supposedly like, the ideas are real? Is the play then obsolete?
So this is a question about the Nether is a play which is so heavily steeped in technology, will it not immediately become, not immediately, but when it becomes dated, how is it possible to stage it?
Well, when you say virtual reality, what do you mean?
I don't know really.
I mean, do you mean like this Oculus thing? Do you mean like, you know, you can put some glasses on and you can totally believe you're in an environment? Is that what you mean? That
I think there'll be a different moral challenge, ultimately. I think even once we get to that stage with technology, there will be something else that will make us ask these questions. And so, yes, I think that maybe the interpretation of the play, what we've done with it may feel dated, but I don't think the idea will necessarily feel dated. I think that technology will have moved forward and we'll have other moral challenges. There will always, I think, be moral challenges to us, ultimately, and people will be always writing plays about that, hopefully.
Hello.
Yes, just in terms of, we can see, you know, to a strong degree what the interaction of different theater technologies can do in this case, and we've seen Warhorse, you know, and there's lots of exciting things going on in the theater. But as a set designer and a video designer, what do you imagine that is at the edge of our periphery? What is something we might be able to do, that we'd like to do? You know, technologies being developed by other sectors, for instance. Things that might come to the theater that we haven't seen yet.
I'm going to try and, again, paraphrase this, which is... it was good. It's essentially a wish list. Are there technologies that you've seen that you would like to use?
It's a great question.
I'm a theater producer, and I want to know what's coming up next.
I was thinking about this actually, you know, coming in this evening, and you know what? I don't know. I think that there are so many different things out there. As I said, this sort of virtual reality Oculus Rift thing is interesting, but it's on an individual basis. Actually, it's about you exploring something, which is not really what theatre is about necessarily. And how could that technology be developed so that a whole audience could experience the same thing, which I think is why people like to come to the theatre.
I think that's at the root of your question, in fact, is, you see, that act of just everyone sitting together and experiencing together the moments and the beats of someone picking up this prop, saying this line, the fact that everyone sits physically in the same room, and especially when we work on large-scale pop concerts and there's 80,000 people all mashed up together in a stadium, and just what happens. I mean, it's going to get a bit new age now, but you know when you do a yoga class, and when everyone does the down dog or whatever, when everyone's doing the warrior together, they're just going, oh, you know, and there is something about everybody. And I think the commonality of the experience. So those things that you do when you've all got your headphones on. So if you go and see a game and you've all got your headphones on, or that thing they did at Stratford Station. I don't know if anyone went to that. It was cool. You all sat at Stratford Station. You all had your headphones on, and you just watched all the people arriving off a train, and you picked out 2 of them in a red coat or something, and they had this whole play, and you heard it because they were the 2 with microphones on, and it was just amongst all the commuters. But you know what, of course, you didn't have was that commonality of feeling connected to the person you were sitting next to. So if there's going to be a technology that, you know, ultimately, I mean, we are all in each other's minds much more than ever before, aren't we? I mean, in the fact that any work that you've ever done I can look at without even meeting you, pretty much, or anything that's online. We can all, there's lots of people who, you know, we talk to each other through the things that we share, don't we, across networks now. So we do have a kind of connection. So as that develops, I guess, and we all become part of one big shared brain, which we kind of are doing, that, I guess, theatre will follow that. So we will not have to put the headphones on, and we won't have to put the Google glasses on, but we'll be able to somehow, I guess the rules of interaction between the audience and the stage will probably evolve. You know, whereas at the moment, the terms of engagement are that we're here, we're the actors, we're doing this stuff, and you are sitting there watching, and you have the special privilege of being together watching, so you are watching as a community of watchers, which is why coming to live things is so special and isn't going away as we spend most of our day looking at our little screens. I think that's why it's so refreshing to everyone to be in a room not looking at a little screen, but looking at people doing stuff. So that's where I think it'll get interesting, is when those terms of engagement evolve. And how you interact, you know, because that's always a difficult one. We often get asked on some of the pop projects we do, there's always somebody will say, but can we have the audience, you know, activating the stage? Can they somehow do something that will put something on the screen or give them a voice? Are you doing it now?
Perhaps. I don't know yet.
You see, I think that'll go. I think that, you know, the phone.
I just friended you.
Oh, thank you. I think I need friends, but I think the phone thing. I think the phone. You know, the phone's going to become a watch, and then the watch is going to become a little piece of, you know, something underneath the skin, isn't it? All those little gadgets will go away, and you won't need to type on a keyboard anymore. You'll just sort of gesture. That's what happened.
Hi.
So off the back of that, do you think it's the way in which you're designing at the moment that is creating kind of this drive for new technologies, or is it the kind of availability of new technologies that is allowing you to experiment with them and kind of forward kind of theatre design into the future?
I think that
was
you don't need to
extremely
paraphrase. It's a brilliant question.
I'm under orders.
Oh, right. It's maybe because people can't hear.
I apologise. It was an
extremely.
extremely eloquent question about whether the design drives the new technologies, or the availability of new technologies drives the design. To horribly paraphrase, it was a very eloquent question.
Yeah, that's a good paraphrase. But I think it's a really good question, and for me certainly. Subliminally, I will be designing something because I know that someone like Luke can probably make it happen, or can't quite make it happen. But if we prod him enough, we'll think of a way to make it happen. Do you know, it's normally that. I tell you what it is, the things that are really exciting are the things that you have a little glint in your eye and think, it might just be possible. It might just be possible. You know, if it feels like it's possible, there you go, okay. But when you see someone else, you get 2 little glints in their eye, go, I might just be able to do that, you know. But I think in terms of which comes first, really I come down pretty strongly on reading the material. You know, I don't generate work out of nothing. You know, I don't make art. I don't have an idea and make a piece of art. I read a play. I'm lucky enough to be given material to work from. So if I read a play or listen to a song or look at a fashion collection, whichever medium it's going to be in, or listen to an opera, it's really feeling what the piece needs. What's the need of the piece? What is needed so that people can engage with this piece? And it always starts from the need of the piece. But I think subliminally, the more I work over 20 years, the more work I see in other media as well as theatre, the more subliminally I'm building up an awareness of what can be done. And certainly working in pop music allowed me, and you really, because we both came, you know, in and out of pop music, there was stuff that was happening. Because I think what happens, I mean, literally, when someone within the pop world might say to me, oh, you're about to do so-and-so's tour, and they say, what fixtures are you going to use? And that might be the first question, you know, because that whole tradition in rock and roll touring comes from the tourability of it, and comes from how can you pick it up and move it from city to city. And it's often driven by people who are engaged with the picking up and the moving of it, and that's what drives the design of it. So naturally, the first thing that a lot of people would ask you is, what will be the kit? What will be the light fixtures? What are you going to use? What type of screen are you going to use? You know, and I have no answer to that question ever. I don't really give a fuck, you know, as long as, you know, as long as it came from Maplin, I mean, I don't care. You've got an answer here.
I think it's just about frame of reference as well. It's about making sure you're not just looking internally in theatre or performing arts, that you're looking at lots of other different things. And so it's not necessarily that the technology that's available is driving what you do. It's like, oh, there's something interesting about that, or there's something interesting about that bit of technology, and then bringing that into a different world. So just all picking up things from different frames of reference, really. And also the other thing I'd like to mention, just talking about gear and equipment and all that kind of stuff. It's one of the things that I like to call myself, I try not to call myself a projection designer, because that already puts me in a hole. And it might not be projection. It might be something else. We might be using slide projectors, we might be using a LED, or you know, there's so many different options for how to create an image on stage that projection is only one of them. And so I think as soon as you start referring to yourself in that kind of way, you're limiting yourself, I think.
But I do think it's true also that you come up with an idea, and you know, some of the most exciting ideas are the ones you don't know how to do it. You don't know if there is a way to do it. You just ask enough people and hopefully they come up with something.
Great. I think we've probably got time for about 2 more questions. So, yes.
I'm just wondering, have you found since you started in the industry, have audience expectations ever influenced the work, or are they influencing it now in a different way to when you started, and where are they going with that respect? Okay.
So this is a question, since you've started, have audience expectations influenced the work, and is that becoming more prevalent, I guess, with things like Twitter especially, and you know, the advance of social media? I suppose it comes back to my pressure question that I asked as well, about whether each time you sort of reach a new landmark, are you then pushed further, and does audience expectation drive you?
I think it's true. I mean, I think it's interesting as a set designer, for people in the audience who are set designers, you're only ever, of course, as good, your work's only as good as the people you collaborate with, which is largely the directors or the artists that you work with. And when you start out, if you're beginning as a set designer, you start out, you really take whatever work is going. You take anything just to build up your 10,000 hours, just to keep doing it and doing it and doing it, because you're only going to get good if you do it tons. But that does mean you are vulnerable, because you'll work with people who may not share your aesthetic, or may not want to find the same solutions as you do. And you end up, because the hierarchy of theatre is that the director, I remember David DeVoe saying this to me, he said the director and the designer are equal, but the director's word is final. You know? And it's kind of like that. It all feels equal all the way home, but when it comes to it, you know, really, certainly when you're starting out. So I think that then there comes a sort of moment where because now people are aware of what kind of work you do, because one of the notorious things about set design is the photographing, or the lack of photographing of it. And it's something I could talk for another hour on, is the photographs of set design. They're not the same as set design, they're a different thing. It's a different art form, but it also, it's the only thing you have left, is the photograph. So after a while, in answer to your question, people start to know what kind of work you do, and they start having an expectation, which hopefully means that people who don't like that kind of work will not ask you to work for them anymore, which is really good, because you won't get to work with people who don't like the kind of work you do. And actually that is happening to me right now, I have to share with you, in America. I am working with someone who has no idea what I do and really hates it all. But I'm going to keep doing it, it's going to be fun, it's going to be fun. But yeah, so after a while, you do set up a kind of body of work which becomes its own engine a bit. And it's not that any of the work will look the same, because hopefully if you're a set designer and you're solving different problems for each different situation, there isn't going to be a continuity of style so much, but there will be a continuity of approach. And so that, you do, therefore, you wouldn't want to put a piece of work out there that didn't deliver on that. And if you do put one out there that doesn't, then you have to not look at the Twitter for a while, because, No, but I think it's good. That kind of critique through social media has been really healthy, I think.
I think it's an interesting, just before, as well, that it's something that we tend to criticise in theatre, but not in other mediums. For example, you can look at a Scorsese film, and has a particular style, you say that's a Scorsese film, or a David Lynch film, and it has a very recognisable style, and that's lauded. Whereas in theatre, I think often that seems to be something that's criticised, directorially as well as anything else. Just an observation. Luke?
And talking about how audiences react to your work, I think as a video designer, there was a point 10 years ago where just a production having video, it was amazing. And I think we've reached the point now where there's so much quality video design going on out there, so many great people doing it now, that audiences have become more aware and more aware of how to critique it, and actually, so they could say that this bit of it was great and this bit of it wasn't so great, and that's really exciting. And certainly as a designer, sort of interacting with your audience, it's great to be able to have that positive feedback rather than just being able to throw something up and everyone says it's amazing. I think that's a really healthy place to be.
Great, and I think one final question, and then I'll draw us. Yes.
I'm just curious about what kind of technology you want to use next, like hologram or like robot techniques or something.
Okay, so this, just to repeat this question, is now specifically what's the type of technology you'd like to use next?
I hope that I never get to a point where as I said earlier, I think it's about reference. So if I saw something like a robot interacting with projection, which there's been a few projects around recently, and looking at that and saying, oh, that could be interesting. I don't want to go around hunting for a project to use that on. What I'd like to do is find a project and go, oh, that's a really great idea. It's a really great play, a really interesting story, and this might help that. So there aren't specific technologies out there that I look at and go, yeah, I want to use that, I want to do that, because I think that can warp what you bring to a project.
I remember the first time I saw what we call a hologram, which isn't really a hologram, of course. It's Pepper's Ghost. It's not a hologram, it's Pepper's Ghost. What Musion do is Pepper's Ghost. So they have a, you guys all know this, but they have a 45-degree mirror, which is actually a piece of glass, or a stretched cover of cigarette boxes, isn't it? And then they project on the floor or on the ceiling, depending on the angle of the film. And it's actually the reflection of that projection that you're seeing. And originally in the 1850s or whatever it was Mr. Edward Pepper who did it, and he had an actor lying on the floor on a little revolving table or something, and that was a floating person. It was miraculous. Anyway, whenever it was, oh God, 2000 or something, there was a theatre company called 4D Art, from Montreal, where so many of these things come from, and they were at the Manchester Library Theatre, and me and Jack drove all the way up to Manchester just because we had to see this. And it was like magic, it really was. I was sat probably, just where you were sitting, and I looked and I thought I was watching ghosts on the stage. It was so magical. It was actually, the hologram was sitting there, not hologram, the Pepper's Ghost person was sitting there, and the actor was sitting here, and they were interacting, and it was, and I couldn't see a screen. And I stood right at the front, and I poked my hand in, and couldn't see a screen. So I do think the Musion thing is interesting, the hologram thing, and I haven't seen a brilliant bit of theatre use it. And the reason is because of the bloody sightlines. Because you have to, the viewing angle only works sort of from centre and from low, and it doesn't work up the top. And I mean, we've just done it on this exhibition, and it wasn't brilliantly lit, was it? You have to really like what's beyond it. Anyway, so in answer to your question about, would we like to use holograms, would we like to use robots, are there bits of technology that we'd like to use? Yes to both of those, I just would really like to not fuck it up, because I haven't done a good hologram thing.
That's the thing, especially talking about the Pepper's Ghost thing, that you don't want to take on a technology onto a project that's going to hamper the project in other ways. And so that is a technology that works under under very, very tight conditions. And so you have to get the whole production on board with that if you're going to use it. And so you don't want this technology to really affect how the rest of the production works, I suppose. That's one thing you've got to be really careful of when using this stuff.
Great, thank you very much. I guess that brings us to a close. Thank you all for staying behind, and thank you to Ez and Luke for